listening to CLNS Media, powered by betonline.ag. Go to clnsmedia.com/roll. Use our promo code CLNS50 for 50% off your first deposit.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Red Sox Beat podcast on the CLNS Media Network, the leading online video and audio provider for Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Chris Cotillo from MassLive.com, and this episode is episode 218 of the show. It is brought to you by betonline.ag, which is CLNS Media's preferred online sportsbook, and we are welcomed today by fellow Red Sox beat writer Ian Browne from MLB.com. He's been covering the team for, 80% of my life, would you say?
Too much of your life.
Yeah,
since 2002. This is year number 18 for me.
Wow. So there's in that time, obviously he's covered Dustin Pedroia for his whole career. That's kind of the story of what we're going to talk about today, amongst some other things. But I just kind of wanted to get your reaction, Ian, on yesterday. We were both there for Dustin Pedroia. It was not a retirement press conference. We didn't want to say that, but it felt like a quasi-retirement press conference. It was the first time, for all the injuries, all the setbacks that he's had with that knee in the last year, that he decided to acknowledge that this could be it. He might not be able to ever play again, and it was kind of a really interesting admission, and one that I think was it's very tough for him to make yesterday.
Yeah, it definitely felt like a retirement press conference to me. And to me, the biggest thing was when Terry Francona was asked about it. Pedroia had gone over to talk to Tito before his press conference. They're very close. They always have been. And when Francona was talking about Pedroia, based on their conversation, he was talking about his career in the past tense. Yep. So to me, that I think Dustin Pedroia was a lot more candid with Francona, telling him, "Look, this is probably the end for me." I think that Pedroia, I asked him directly, "Dustin, do you think you can play again?" And he said, "I'm not sure." For him to say that, this guy who was so adamant all along that he's going to be able to find a way back, he's going to be able to defy the odds, this has just exhausted him. He's been trying to do this for 2 years now, and it seems to me like he can play for a week, and then the knee kind of buckles up on him again. So I think he knows that it's just not going to happen. He figures, let's just wait a few weeks, don't do anything, see if a miracle happens. But other than like a David Wright love fest weekend that happened with the Mets last year, maybe something like that happens for Pedroia. Other than that type of thing, I don't see him playing for the Red Sox again.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously, it was it kind of happened quickly based on kind of they were still going with that line that he was going to be back, he was going to get through. He, just kind of recap, obviously played 6 games for the Red Sox this year, came back for the home opener, played 6 games, did not play well in those games, made a couple good plays in the field, but couldn't hit. Then he re-injured the knee in New York in mid-April, went back on the injured list at that point, went on rehab, had a setback, was pulled off his rehab assignment, went back, was with Portland over the weekend, and after 4 innings of a game, had to remove himself on Friday night. And just a week after saying, I'll get through the rehab, I'll get through the setbacks, he decided yesterday, as he was placed on the 60-day injured list, to take a break, to stop the rehab for a little bit. He's going to be with the Red Sox for the next week through their trip to New York, and then he's going to go home to Arizona for the second straight year. I thought, some people were saying that it was similar to how he took a break last year and decided to go home, but he went home last year to rehab and do rehab, on his own terms and the way he wanted to, with the goal of getting back for opening day this year. And this time he's going home to relax and rest and be with his family and really not do any baseball activities, at least for the next few weeks. And we'll see. Everything's pretty indefinite. They wouldn't speak in any definite terms yesterday. I think the interesting thing to me is that change, right, that we heard yesterday from him, that change in kind of the company line. I think Alex Cora, Dombrowski, and Pedroia were all saying all along, we expect this guy to be back. Dombrowski, I think, said he thought he could play 120 games, which always seemed like a big reach. And I think yesterday, to me, it wasn't as much of an epiphany that they had versus just a decision to shift the public narrative. I don't know what you think on that, but I think that this was kind of what they knew all along, and finally it was time to publicly admit it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And as far you can only bang your head against the wall on this so many times. And I think Pedroia was starting to feel like, like he talked about yesterday. It was kind of sad to hear him say, look, he has to rehab every day just to be able to do anything. So he's spending half his day rehabbing his knee just so he can go out there and try to play baseball. And then he gets out there and is not responding. And this is why, David Ortiz retired in 2016 because he was spending so much time getting treatment on his Achilles just to be able to go out there. Well, at least in David's case, he had some payoff. He was going out there and hitting home runs as a DH, obviously a much different thing. He was going out there and hitting home runs once he got out there. For Pedroia, he's doing all this monotonous work in the trainer's room, spending more time than anybody knew, and for no payoff at all. To be able to play minor league baseball, for a week and go like 3 for 20 or whatever, all
Right.
signals, and just then to just be back to square. I mean, I saw him in the clubhouse yesterday briefly before the press conference, and he was limping. Then, I mean, I could see it. And I saw
Mm-hmm.
that also in the Patriots Day weekend. I remember when he was,
Yep.
they had engaged him for a couple days, and then this was a couple days before that popping thing in New York. And I remember watching him, and I'm like, this guy can't even walk through the clubhouse. It was kind
Mm-hmm.
of jarring to watch at the time, and just it's kind of obvious to me that he just wasn't going to be able to do it, and he's tried everything he could, and it's just not happening. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how much time he takes before finally coming out and saying, look, I'm not going to play baseball anymore. Obviously he has 2 years left on his contract. So whether they shift that to some sort of public service contract with the Red Sox, where he can be a quasi coach, instructor, I thought it was funny yesterday when he said kind of motivational speaker, that type of thing. It'd be interesting to see, what Dustin Pedroia does over the life of his contract.
Yeah, for sure. And I think people think that there's a way the Red Sox don't have to pay him by either releasing him or whatever, and that it's not happening. They're going to pay the rest of that 3 years, 40 million, including this year. And if he retires, he doesn't get any of it, and that's not going to happen, obviously. So it could be something similar to Prince Fielder, who's been on the 60-day injured list, DL, whatever, with the Rangers after he was medically unable to play a couple years ago. Could be something similar to David Wright. The Red Sox, I don't believe they have insurance on Pedroia's deal. So the financial aspect of that, that ship has sailed, I think, and also on that point, I think he earned that contract with everything that he did. I think at this point, from a roster standpoint, from a competitive standpoint, and Pedroia even alluded to this yesterday talking to us. He said it's not fair if I can't play for 3 days and I'm on the major league roster and have Alex playing with 24 players when the other team's having 25 out there. From a roster standpoint, the Red Sox, with the emergence of Michael Chavis, I think everybody agrees Michael Chavis wasn't going back down to accommodate Pedroia. And at that point, you're probably cutting either Steve Pearce or Eduardo Nunez, or at least having somebody go on the IL just to force Pedroia back. This kind of gives the Red Sox, lets them relax a little bit and not have to do that, which I think, is a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, that's why I think that the whole time they were like, when he went off back on this second rehab after the popping thing at Yankee Stadium, they said, look, you got to go down there and play every day, because they didn't want to cut ties with a Steve Pearce or an Eduardo Nunez to get Pedroia back for a week and only to have him have a setback. So the only way they were going to let him back is if they saw that his knee could withstand the rigors of playing every day, because it's not fair to the rest of the roster. I mean, you saw last year they cut Hanley Ramirez to make room for Pedroia, and that was ironic that 3 days later Pedroia was hurt again, and so they
Yeah.
kind of at the time they cut Hanley for no reason, it seemed like. So I think they didn't want to get into that again for the second straight year.
Yeah, well, I mean, they kind of already did. I mean, the reason that Blake Swihart's not on the roster is because they expected Pedroia back. Turns out that spot went to Chavis, but there's been collateral damage from this whole thing. Hanley, I think he was on his last legs, as we saw with his cameo with Cleveland earlier this year, and there might have been some other things going on there with Hanley. That story, as Rob Bradford would say, that story's yet to be told. But we have with Blake Swihart. People are very attached to Blake Swihart, as we all see on Twitter all the time. He's a young guy that they had to cut. Not the reason they couldn't carry three catchers, and Swihart was more of a utility guy at sometimes than a catcher, is because they expected Pedroia and they wanted to have Holt, Nunez, and Pedroia all on the roster. So with that, what do you think they do from this point on in the infield? I think Chavis entrenched as the starting second baseman who can play first and third, and then just having Holt and Nunez as bench options. Do you think Chavis is now the guy going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're pretty well set up for the rest of this year. The way this roster is set up to play Chavis as your primary guy, and the good thing about this is you have the flexibility to bring to bring Holt in there,
Right.
late in games, and Nunez if you need to, and we'll see how Chavis progresses. There's still some things that he's learning on defense. So I think you're in good shape. You're probably in better shape. I mean, you look at Chavis for Ian Kinsler. I mean, that's
Right.
basically
That's exactly what it is.
you make that trade in a heartbeat with the production that Chavis is giving you at the plate. So I think the more interesting thing is, what are they going to do down the road at second base? Because I think that Chavis probably, he's their first baseman. I think kind of going forward, you have Chavis at first, and you have Devers at third. So kind of, do you go out and get a second baseman, over the winter? But I think that in the short term that they're in as good a shape as you could be, having Holt, Nunez, and Michael Chavis, and then if Zue Lin ever comes back, then you got another option there.
And a guy that my colleague Chris Smith from Mass Live, among many other minor leaguers, loves is Marco Hernandez, who's actually been tearing it up at Pawtucket. He's another guy that could contribute, if one of these guys gets hurt. So they actually have some good depth. Lynn, Hernandez behind the three guys on the major league roster. And at this point, you're looking at a roster that positionally is suddenly set. The Pedroia thing was the only thing that was going to disrupt this current group, barring an injury. You have, if Pierce or Moreland goes down, you have Chavis can go to first. If Devers goes down, you have Chavis who can go to third. Nunez can play third. Holt can play shortstop if something happens to Bogarts. I mean, there's a lot of guys with flexibility suddenly on this roster that you wouldn't have gotten if Pedroia was there. He was going to only play second when he was available, and I think roster-wise, as much as Pedroia has meant to these guys for years and years and years, it's a little bit of a blessing in disguise and gives Alex Cora a lot of options. I think, and I've only been covering the team for a year. Like you said, you've been covering it for 18. That includes Pedroia's whole career. I think people now, and I tweeted about this a couple weeks ago, and I talked about this on the show, people are looking at Pedroia in a much different light than they did previously. So I just wanted to get your take on what you think how you think his legacy has changed, and in a way that I think is unfair by looking at him as damaged goods or a waste of time or a guy who's just a waste for the Red Sox after everything he's done and something that you've seen in person for all how many every years he's been playing.
Yeah, Chris, I want to say that there are two other situations, since I've been on the beat, that are kind of comparable to this. The first guy I ever saw this where perception changed like this was Nomar Garciaparra, who this guy
my favorite
was
player growing up.
Yeah, I mean, this guy was as popular as you could possibly be. I mean, I think he was every kid your age's favorite player. You're probably doing the thing with your batting gloves at the play and trying to imitate his stance. I mean, this guy was larger than life, and suddenly, they tried to trade him and get Alex Rodriguez, and then his Achilles gets messed up, and then the fan base just falls in love. I don't remember. They fall in love with Pokey Reese kind of early in the 2004 season. And then, Nomar's coming back from this Achilles thing, and the fans did not want Nomar. They started to look at Nomar as this disenchanted guy who was kind of ruining the clubhouse, kind of like a lot of people view Pedroia like that ever since 2017 with some of the things that happened that year with Manny Machado and pointing fingers at, saying it's not me that tried to hit you, it's them. And it also, Kevin Youkilis was the other guy. This guy was so popular with the fans, and then he broke down, and then you have Will Middlebrooks kind of flavor of the month, and people didn't want Youkilis around anymore, and that situation, and you saw Youkilis get traded, but now I think now that this whole thing is over with Pedroia, I think that the fans are going to sit back and say this guy meant a ton to us. I mean, it happened with Nomar when he came back with Oakland, like I think it was 5 years after he got traded.
It was a long time after.
Yeah, one of the loudest ovations I've ever heard a player get, and I'm sure it's going to be the same way with Pedroia. People are going to forget about the stuff that's happened, kind of his diminished skills and the impatience that fans were having with his injuries. And I think for whatever reason, I thought it was kind of unfair how the fans really, and you tweeted about this I think a week or so ago, just the fans had really soured on this guy and forgotten what he meant to this team. I mean, there's no 2007 World Championship without Dustin Pedroia. I mean, Rookie of the Year. This guy in the playoffs was just huge for them against both Cleveland and in Colorado. And then, the next year, he was their best player, through that with that beaten up team that went and got to Game 7 of the ALCS against Tampa Bay.
Yep.
Pedroia was by far their best player in that playoff run. And then 2013 didn't have a great postseason, but had a very good regular season. Actually I think he played with a broken bone in his one of his fingers that year for like the whole year and didn't say anything until after the season. So just what this guy did to play hurt, I think, is what people should appreciate. And I thought it was kind of fitting in a way that, the Pedroia news and the Bill Buckner thing, it all came out yesterday, because to me, those are the two guys who played through the most pain of any players since I've been watching the Red Sox. I'm not old enough to have covered Buckner, but watching throughout my childhood, and this guy, what he endured and what he played through, very similar to Pedroia. And I think that that's what fans are going to remember. They're not going to, the silliness that has gone on really since 2017 with the Matt Barnes thing and the whether Pedroia cheered when David Price paraded Dennis Eckersley. I mean, that kind of silliness, that's going to wash away now. People are going to remember the great plays this guy made, the big hits this guy had. That's,
the thing to me is people hating on him for being hurt and everything. If you look at and think about what he's played through, and obviously you know more about that and just talked about it a little bit. If you look at what he's played through in his career, it's not a guy that is gonna, this is the name that comes to mind for me is J.D. Drew, that has a blister a day and is pulled out of the lineup before a lot of games and all that kind of stuff. This is a guy who played very hurt at a lot of times during his career. His style of play obviously was one that is going to get you banged up. And I think now that just kind of proves that after everything that he's played through, this must be very, very painful if he can't, get through it.
Yeah, Chris, I don't even see a lot of guys who would ever even tried to play through this thing the last couple of years. I think most guys would have just kind of called it a career, and this guy was doing everything he could, because I think nobody felt worried. He probably felt bad that he was earning all this money to kind of not do anything. But like you said, I think that they're not going to try to get out of this contract, because look, they realized what he did and just what he tried to do the last couple of years. And what he played through during 2 championship seasons. 07, he had a broken hamate bone in the Rob Bradford, I remember, broke that story for the Herald back after the 07 World Series, that Pedroia had played in that playoff run with a broken hamate bone. And just the many things that he did for this team to get them where they were, and leadership wise, setting the tone with leadership, kind of lead by example type of thing. I think that you got your money's worth out of this guy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think John Tomasi tweeted this out yesterday, a little, maybe not sad is the right word, but disappointing footnote on all of this. Pedroia was a 300 hitter entering the season, went 2 for 20. That's for his career, went 2 for 20, and now hitting 299 for his career. If this is it for Pedroia, in 14 major league seasons, hit 299 with 140 homers, 725 RBIs. 4 All-Star appearances, obviously the Rookie of the Year in 2007, the MVP in 2008. 4 Gold Gloves, I believe, and 2 other top 10 MVP finishes. And this is a guy that, this is before my time on the beat, but this is, I think, your 45th or 46th year back in 2017. He hit 293 in 105 games, and he hit 318 the year before at age 32. I mean, this is a guy who, as ugly as the injuries have been in the last couple of years, produced when he was on the field last too.
Yeah, and that to me was amazing in 2017. He wasn't right that whole year, really. After that, we all remember the Machado play. That was April 21st. I just looked this up yesterday. I think it was April 21st, 2017. He was diminished for the rest of that season.
Yep.
And to be able to hit 293, play pretty good defense. I remember he made a great play in Texas off like a ball, took a crazy bounce like off a side door or something in Texas. He was running all over the place, Chris. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't right physically. It was sad by the playoffs that year against Houston. He had nothing left. And, Alex Cora, as the bench coach for the Astros team, he could see that Pedroia, he was playing on one leg, and it was kind of painful to watch. I remember he made the last out in that series, and he kind of battled, through the at-bat against Giles, I think, but you could just see he had nothing, and he just hit a little slow roller to second base to end the series. And it was just sad kind of watching him go out with such diminished tools at that time. And that was really the end, I think, was that, by the end of 2017, the knee was just completely shot. And he tried to have this innovative surgery here that nobody had ever had before. No baseball player had ever had. Him and Stephen Wright are the two that have had it. And it just, it was worth a shot, I guess. I guess that was his only real, he didn't really see any better options. So he gave it a shot and just didn't take,
Yeah, and I think there's some guys that statistically they drop off, a lot in their last few years, and you see that slow decline. You see a lot of really bad deals happen. Albert Pujols is a good example. There's been some other guys, and with Pedroia, that hasn't happened. There wasn't that full year where he wasn't producing. There was, 2 years of rehab that maybe dragged on too long, but there wasn't that drop, that fall from grace, at least on the field. So Ian, if you want to. I don't know if there's a line on if Pedroia will ever play again. I don't think we like the odds on that one, but there you have a lot of things over there at Bet Online if you want to bet on things like that. So it's already springtime in Boston. And we have a rainy day today, might have a rain out, but the weather's been a little bit better. The Red Sox have had an uneven year so far, but you can still get in on the action and bet on them if you want. There's only one place to share in the Red Sox wins by grabbing the odds and allowing the experts at betonline.ag to do the heavy lifting for you. They have sports, they have live betting, virtual casino, anything you want, betonline.ag. That's AG like Attorney General, is CLNS Media's preferred sportsbook online. If you're feeling lucky and you want to support our podcast, go to clnsmedia.com/SoxBeat. That's SOXBEAT. And use the promo code CLNS50, that's CLNS50, for that 50% sign-up bonus. CLNS50 on betonline.ag, which is your online sportsbook experts. So back to the Pedroia talk for a second. Is there any, I think my interactions with him have been limited, obviously, because he wasn't around for a lot of last year. He was there in spring training, but everything we talked about him is knee related, so I don't have a ton of good stories, but I wanted you to share some kind of behind the scenes, if you could, Pedroia memories and moments that you have.
Yeah, it's funny, Chris. I wish you could have covered him a little earlier in his career, because he used to, before all those injuries started setting him and kind of making him a shell of what he was hilarious in the clubhouse. I mean, just the things he would blurt out. I remember I had this, one of these. This green striped sort of rugby shirt I was wearing one day, and he's yelling at me, "Where's Waldo?" And all this stuff. It just one day we were in Toronto. It was like a Sunday day game, and he said, "You know what?" He's like, "I'm gonna have 6 Red Bulls, get 2 hits, and die." Pointed that out in the middle of the, it was me and a couple other guys who were there. It was just funny. He used to just he had that swagger, when and it was sad to kind of see that go, because once he stopped talking like that, it's just because, you knew that he couldn't back it up anymore. But just the running thing with, Pedroia and Tito, and they were always yelling and screaming at each other and making fun of him. One time when John Farrell was the pitching coach, John Farrell, much more of a fun-loving guy when he was the pitching coach. He once threw Pedroia in a trash barrel. And this was, it's like 2008 or 2009, somewhere around there. So they used to just have so much fun with this guy, and he just, he just loved to compete, and he knew how good he was, and he knew that when he was on his game, he couldn't be stopped. And the whole laser show thing was pretty funny. I was there that night, and that was actually, he was defending David Ortiz. This was in 2009 or 10. Ortiz was off to one of those terrible starts he had, and Pedroia said, "Oh, remember me in 2007? You guys were all ready to send me back to the minor leagues and play Alex Cora and all this, and then next thing you know, what happened? A laser show." So that was when the whole it was just like this impromptu thing on the Nesson. Nesson had carried it live in the post game. One of those things that kind of took on a life of its own after that. But he was a lot of fun to be around those first 7-8 years until this last couple of years were kind of just depressing for him, I think.
Yeah, and I think Laser Show is a much better nickname than the short-lived Muddy Chicken from whenever that was.
That was an intoxicated Josh Beckett came up with that one after a 17 or 18 inning game in the Sunday night game in Tampa in 2011.
Yeah, well, I remember that nickname made a Sports Illustrated cover, and that was about it. And then it went back to being the Laser Show, and I think it's a much more fitting nickname. I think, we talk about Pedroia's future because it's probably not going to be on the playing field as he finally acknowledged publicly yesterday. It's going to be probably with the Red Sox in some capacity, whether that's a special assistant, a coach. I don't know if he would, join the full-time coaching staff, but if he does, I think there would be a spot for him on, in a couple years. And I have this theory that I don't think I've discussed on the show that Alex Cora, after 2 or 3 years, is going to assemble his all-star coaching staff of all the guys that he talks about all the time. I think Pedroia will have a spot on that alongside bench coach Joey Cora, hitting coach Alex Cintron, Carlos Beltran will be in the mix. I'm fully convinced that these guys that he brings up all the time will be in there. And if Pedroia wants a spot, I think one is his, right?
I totally agree with you, Chris. And to me, it's interesting. Would Pedroia ever manage? And I don't think this is something he would do for a while. And you haven't seen that many great players become managers, but he's such a baseball junkie. And you look at two of his best friends in the game really are Terry Francona and Alex Cora. So you wonder, he kind of speaks that language, and he just loves being around. He knows the game so well. So I wonder if he ever would become a manager. I think he's going to watch his kids grow up, Chris. So I don't think that he's going to. I think he's going to use this downtime to really just have fun with his kids. Watch his kids play Little League. See them go through all the things he went through. But I think once they get older. He's 35 years old. So I'm talking,
Yeah. I mean,
10 years.
People look at him like he's 50 or 55 at this point.
Yeah. So 10, 15 years from now, would not surprise me at all if he sinks his teeth into this thing and becomes an infield coach or even a manager. But I think the next few years, you're probably going to see him more kind of in a part-time, I'd say somewhere between Pedro and Varitek. Well, I think you'll see him more than Pedro and probably a little less than Varitek.
Yeah, that sounds about right. One thing that I think I've learned in my year on the beat is the difference in the roles for some special assistants and how much they're actually there. I thought it was kind of a cushy job that nobody actually showed up, but we barely see Ortiz. He pops in once in a while and.
I want David Ortiz's job, Chris.
Yeah, that'll be great. You do commercials for 360 days of the year and show up in the spring training clubhouse for the other 5, and then pop on Fox every so often and make a lot of money probably doing it. But there's guys. I mean, you mentioned Varitek, just kind of to talk about that. He's there all the time. He's in uniform. He's in the clubhouse. He's on our flight sometimes as we fist pumping Ian Browne walking down the aisle on our flight to Seattle a few weeks ago. Big moment in Ian Browne's career.
Big moment, yeah.
And then we have, Pedro is sometimes on the road even. So these guys are active. Other guys are not. But I think Pedroia is the kind of guy that would fully commit to, being part of it. I think, and a big part of that, like we talked about, is his relationship with Alex Cora. I think it's yesterday was telling, and Cora. I thought there was a couple of points yesterday where Cora and Pedroia were both close to getting emotional. And I think one of the last things we'll talk about is how Cora has towed this line with Pedroia, trying to put the best roster out there, but still trying to respect a guy that not just what he's meant to the organization, but what he's meant to Cora. Cora was a mentor to him at the early parts of Pedroia's career. The families are very close. We all know that. I'm sure it's been difficult for Alex, as much as he won't acknowledge it, to toe that line between trying to be as supportive as possible of Pedroia and also realizing the how serious the situation was, and that he's probably not going to get an all-star Pedroia back at any point.
Yeah, I got a great early '90s Celtics analogy for you here, but
here we go.
Yeah, but no, late in Kevin McHale's last couple of years, he was playing for Chris Ford, who was his former teammate and very, very good friend, and Kevin's skills were diminishing. He was kind of injured a lot, like Pedroia, and there was some friction there between McHale and Ford because Ford wasn't playing McHale as much. McHale didn't realize how much his skills were kind of going down, and it got uncomfortable between the two of them. But yeah, the way Cora has handled this has really impressed me, and just Alex Cora's ability really to handle every situation and just be himself. The most stressed out I've ever seen Alex Cora was the whole White House thing. That's the only time I've seen him where it was just like this was really, really getting to him. But other than that, this guy handles everything thrown it his way simply by being himself and comfortable in his own skin. And you've seen that so many times the last couple of years. And yeah, this Pedroia situation, that could not have been easy. But, I don't see any signs that their relationship has suffered at all yesterday. You could see the words from Alex Cora were really kind of genuine yesterday. Look, I love this guy. I love his family. And, that was pretty cool. So I think that Alex deserves a lot of credit again, just for the way that he handled, like you said, a very delicate situation here with Dustin.
And Dombrowski deserves some credit as well, for as much as that comment about playing 120 games was either a bold-faced lie or just him drinking the Pedroia Kool-Aid at that point. I think he said yesterday, he used a phrase that I would never use in my life by calling himself a Johnny-come-lately to the Red Sox organization compared to those guys. A very Dave Dombrowski type thing to say, which is funny. But he called himself that. But for him to kind of recognize what Pedroia's meant to the Red Sox, still give him a chance, even if it, kind of hamstrings his roster in a way. I think it's been cool to see the organization, the decision makers, respect Pedroia enough to give him a chance. Multiple chances, actually, a lot of chances. Those didn't work out, and now we have a guy who is most likely retired. So I think that's a lot of Pedroia talk. I'm glad that we were able to devote a whole episode to a guy who deserves a lot, and he's meant a lot to the organization. And I think, like I said, fans, if you're listening, be nicer to him. Maybe you will be now that the long and winding rehab road is probably officially over. So that's episode 218 of the podcast. Thank you, Ian Browne, and we will see you at Fenway soon.
Thanks for having me on, Chris.